For this example, we have 3 virtual networks called 1, 2, 3 as usual for the sake of simplification. Each virtual network hosts virtual machines, so a different number of virtual machines. I chose to represent 2, 1, and 3 virtual machines. Actually, it doesn't really matter here. And what matters is actually the fact that we have a virtual machine now called VMC, which has an intrusion detection software installed on it. What you want to do now is to make sure that all traffic on all virtual networks will be routed through this virtual machine. And for that, you are going to create a virtual network peering connection for all virtual networks. And you are required, so in order to complete this, you are required to answer to a set of questions. Either you'll have or not to change the configurations, by default configurations. So the first thing is, would you need to change the virtual network deployment model from Resource Manager to Classic? Or do you have to disable the configuration of virtual network access settings? Or will you have to enable the forwarded traffic settings? Or you'll have to configure gateway transit settings so that you allow gateway transit. In this case, the only thing that you'll have to change, so actually for the exam you can expect to see this kind of screenshot, and I wouldn't say you have to remember everything, that this would be insane, but you'll have to understand actually the reasoning behind it and why you have to choose a particular answer. And I think this can be a bit confusing, especially if you don't have much experience with network interface in Azure. But take them one by one, try to understand each of them, and it will become way easier in the end. So if we go back to our question here, the correct answer would be set the forwarded traffic settings as enabled. And if we go to the documentation to make sure that this is the correct answer, actually this is quite similar to a hub and spoke model, which is given here in the documentation. And you can see here that there are different steps. So in order to enable spoke connectivity, there are different steps that have to be done. So first of all, you'll have to consider deploying an Azure firewall or other network virtual appliances, which is this guy over here. Then you create routes to forward traffic from spoke to the firewall network or network virtual appliances. And then this can be routed to the second spoke. In this scenario, which is similar to our scenario, you must configure the peering connections to allow forwarded traffic. So, which is this option right here. Now, regarding the other options, option A, so set virtual network deployment model to classic. This is incorrect because this is used when you have a classic deployment of a virtual network, which is not our case. Second option, this is since you only have to pick up only one correct answer, this will be false, so you don't have to touch this. And option 4, allow gateway transit. This is incorrect because you want traffic to flow on-premise setup. So now, as the first configurations are done, you are required to create an additional configuration to make sure that, as we know, the traffic is sent through the virtual machine hosting the intrusion software. And you are asked, either you have to add a new route table or to add an address space, to add DNS servers or a service endpoint. In this case, the correct answer is add a new route table. And I'm saying that because it's clearly mentioned in the documentation again. So once you deploy an Azure firewall or other network appliances, then you have to create routes to forward traffic from the spoke to the firewall or to the network virtual appliances. So the correct answer is UDR. So you're gonna set up a route table and then you add the route table to the subnets in other virtual networks. So basically this is what you have to do for this next. So the third thing to do here is to say what you have to enable on VMC, so the virtual machine that has intrusion detection software installed on it. Now, this use case that you can see right here is a use case that is quite likely to see a dig someday because it's kind of complex. It has 3 virtual networks. It can have lots of virtual machines for each virtual network, and so you can expect to see this kind of scenarios. They can, of course, make, and they will make it actually way more complex. They might represent, for example, all the configurations for the virtual networks or for the virtual machines that are inside of it. Maybe they will put some information regarding infrastructure and so on. And then they will present like 20, 30 questions for this use case, as there most probably won't be the same questions, I mean unique questions. There'll probably be 10 or 5, 10, 15 questions, and then they will rephrase them so that they make sure, I think, in my opinion, they will rephrase them so that they make sure that you understood the concepts that are behind them, that you have a reasoning behind, and you didn't give just a wild guess, or you didn't try just to remember the answers and then go to pass the exam. So be ready to see this and try to understand as much as you can. And of course, for the rest of the questions, for some questions that is difficult to understand, of course you can just memorize some answers. It can be also helpful. But for this one, for this case, I think it's important to understand what's behind. So when we go back to our question, so what we'll have to enable for virtual machine C, you can expect to see these answers. Either you enable IP forwarding or the identity for the virtual machine, or you'll have to add an extension to the virtual machine or change the size of the virtual machine. Now the question is enable IP forwarding, and this is easy to find in the documentation. So we are here on IP configurations, and you can see that actually the IP forwarding must be enabled. And to actually here, if you and actually here, if you go through all these steps, then you're gonna see step by step what is required to do. I let you do this. So you create a route table, you create a route, and so on. But I let you understand and to go deeper into details for each of these steps. But for our particular question, you have to know, so you have to know that IP forwarding must be enabled. So which is this first option right here.